never know.
But I mean, to go back to the complaint here on the NHS, the leaflet says that the NHS holds huge and valuable sets of data. It should be used for the public good, but private corporations like Palantir plan to make huge profits from our data. And it goes on to say, Palantir fails the trust test. It has spent most of its history helping the powerful abuse the powerless. Now, how do you convince this audience?
By the way, there's a lot there. But
yes,
okay.
But how do you convince this audience that basically, one, you're not abusing the data that you're collecting from the NHS, two, that we actually have the ability to even know what you're doing with the data, and three, that you're not just making money off the back of it.
So three is easy. You can just go online and see we do not actually resell data. We've never we have a 20-year history. We've never done that. We're not interested in it. Part of the reason we had to leave the Valley is we've been critical of that.
You left Silicon Valley to move to Denver because you disagreed with the idea of selling data.
And the consequences, which I view as a tribal society where everyone loves hating each other. As
an anthropologist, I fully agree.
So, any case, two, it's like, how do you convince people? By the way, I don't see it as my job to convince people. I see it as my job to provide a methodology where they could either convince themselves or not. I don't believe I can convince somebody. I do believe I can say, well, this is how you could convince yourself. And I believe if you wanted to be convinced that the data is not being abused, you would go and look at, there's like certain attributes. Does the data, what happens to data? Where's the data moved? Is it being used for profit? Can it be tracked? Is it GDPR compliant? And by the way, GDPR, and these things are very complicated because, for example, in America, civil libertarians don't want data purged. In Europe, in general, they do. Britain has a very different history. Then there's a general issue where I am certainly on a side that's not aligned with everyone. Whereas we spent 20 years building these products. We recruit and retain some of the most talented people in the world. By the way, our largest office is in Britain. The core development work being done for this product is in England. But there is a debate across the world that I believe is largely lost. Should governments try to produce software? I don't know any government in the world that can produce software like we can produce software.
So you're saying basically that even if the British government wanted to take control of the NHS data itself and process it, it doesn't actually have the ability to do it effectively. So it has to outsource to someone like you. There are certain
parts of managing data that are effectively have become things you will interact with a private company. And the question is which private company, not if. And this is certainly true if you're talking about managing large. By the way, in all modesty, we took disparate data sets and turned it into something where you got vaccinated in a matter of weeks. There are 20,000 British people using this product. By the way, using it meaning the data is tracked. It's very clear what they're doing. A third party. By the way, one of the key tests is can someone like in this audience who's very critical of me and the company, could you go in and see what's happening to the data? Could you see how the data is pipelined? Could you see the provenance of the data without being a software engineer? And the answer to that should be yes. In our case, it is yes. What I'm against actually is not the antitrust. By the way, there's a general legitimacy issue, which we've talked about across Western governments where people don't trust institutions. And I think people have every reason not to be trustful of institutions. And then you have, can Palantir or any other company actually provide a methodology where a intelligent but non-technical person can raise a question? Where I disagree with this is then you would almost think, because there's like in the context of America, like you have red and blue technology, conservative and liberal technology. I think that is a bad path to go down. So if you're going to go to your doctor and say, I'm not going to take this medication because the person is liberal who developed it, or the person is conservative who developed it, I think that's not a path that's going to serve us very well. And it will definitely mean in the military context that we will have severe problems. If somebody is offering you a way to bring patients, give patients better treatment or troops to come home, and that person doesn't agree with you politically, I don't think that's the relevant question. The relevant question is, but by the way, that is becoming a relevant question, and that's what I'm more critical of.
Right. So, all right. So most of you in the room, without knowing it, actually have benefited from Palantir by getting your vaccine. By the way, I should say, if anyone's standing at the back and wants to sit down, do come forward, because there's still space around the front, around the stage, if it would be more comfortable for you. But I guess one question I have is this. One of the other things that concerns many European politicians and voters is this perception that Silicon Valley or Denver is so far ahead of Europe in terms of data capability that essentially Europeans are being forced to put their trust into American companies. Is there any company in Britain which could do what you're doing with data analytics? Or do you think you're just way ahead of anything that the UK can offer?
Well, we believe we build products 5 years before the rest of the world believes they're useful. We've seen this in PG. We've seen it in our products we've built. And so I wouldn't say UK, non-UK. We believe we're 5 years ahead of the products in America. America is the dominant tech community in the world. I believe that's also a problem. And one of the reasons we have our largest office and the core development of the Foundry product that is being used pretty widely in England and in Europe, both in civilian and non-civilian context, is I'm putting my, we're investing in part, but not only, and we have our own interests. London is a great place to recruit and retain talent, international talent, and it's been a bonanza for us on that front, but also because it is a real problem for the world order where, and by the way, it's not even America, it's the West Coast of America. You have a tiny sliver of the world producing most of the great tech companies. We believe we're ahead of those tech companies in our software capabilities, the whole stack. So pipelining the data all the way up to operational uses. But I very much believe this is something that, we have some of our best engineers from England. We're scaling in England. One of the reasons I'm here, quite frankly, is it's not.
What, you're a recruitment drive, are you? Anyone's got any kids who need a job? Go talk to him.
We are very interested in recruiting and retaining, and we have 800 of our 3,200 people are sitting in London, and that's likely to increase because it's just a beacon for talent.
Right.
And but part of the reason that I'm very proud that we're building now is because I think we are training people so that they can eventually teach other people how to build companies like ours.
Right. How does Chinese technology stack up against you? Because many people in Silicon Valley are pretty dismissive of European tech, but they look to China as the one great rival. Is there anything in China that can do what you're doing?
Well, we're not very focused on the Chinese market for obvious reasons. From the beginning, and by the way, it was controversial 20 years ago and 5 years ago, and even when we did our DPO, we don't sell our product to adversarial countries. I think China is very strong in domestic surveillance of the most granular kind. We're not interested in that. I don't believe that I think there's certain things we're building that are pretty far ahead of what they have in both kind of the warfighting context in AI and in targeting. Also, by the way, the very deep focus on what would be called GDPR here or data protection has enormous benefits for collaboration. So at a high level, the technology we provide will allow vertical and horizontal integration simultaneously. And that allows societies that are allied on some issues, but not on others, to collaborate against an adversary that, by the way, would never have built that because they're not interested in that. So I think there's enormous advantages to building a company. Also, I think, quite frankly, non-democratic authoritarian countries have an enormous problem that their talent doesn't want to build a company there because you essentially at some point are going to have to give up the company to the country. And I think, by the way, if you look at what is happening in Ukraine, part of the problem was if you are in software and you want to build a company, you'd be mad to do it there when you could do it in London or in Palo Alto. And that has enormous consequences for the software, especially software industry, which is a talent first industry.
Right. Well, I'm going to turn to the audience for questions in just a moment, so get ready to wave your hand enthusiastically. But before I do, two other quick questions. Firstly, when you look at British intelligence capabilities, how does MI6 GCHQ match up to the CIA and NSA, given the disparity in terms of the European and American tech companies?
Well, look, I can't proxy answer questions about people who use our product. I know these institutions.
Well, you don't be rude about your clients.
I don't. I know these institutions very well. I think Britain, Britain has this modesty that I spent a lot of my life in kind of Germanic Europe, and there's a certain kind of modesty that is sometimes there and often here that is both very helpful and very pleasant. But for example, I think English people underestimate how good their clandestine services are. And I know that their impact is very much underestimated, not just in England, but across Europe, where these clandestine services played a very big role in defeating terror attacks that otherwise would have happened. In software is a very unfair game because size is not the advantage people think. You're better off with small and control over what you're spending and knowing the people in your organization than you are having extra people. And so, as just as a general way of answering the question, many of the smaller institutions across Europe, including in England, just significantly, if you do dollar by dollar spend to output, are massively outperforming what you would think. And I think it would be pretty. In fact, if I have a criticism of European institutions in general and British clandestine services in particular, it would be there's got to be a better way to explain to the people who are essentially paying your bill how much you're doing.
So James Bond needs a better PR campaign.
Well, yeah, but yeah, even there, it's as you know, these things like software are a team effort, and so yeah,
right. What about Ukraine? You and I have chatted a lot about Ukraine in recent months. It's a story I know well. I'm heading off there in a few days, actually. And to my mind, this is a fascinating example of what you're talking about, where an underdog has managed to do much better than expected against a big bully, partly by being agile, flexible, creative, and using data and data technology a lot. Can you tell us what exactly is your role in Ukraine? How do you you were expecting this question. How do you evaluate what is happening there from a data analytics and spying aspect? And do you think that Ukraine can win?
Yeah. I think there's
I'd say Alex Karp is charmingly lost for words. I did warn you about this.
Yeah, no, it's I think Ukraine, the war there will be a turning point for almost every small country in the world, where you look at and you see that the heroism of your own people plus creativity plus software plus light heavy weapons can outperform a country with 100 times your budget and much bigger weapons. And this is a lesson that we've known in tech for a long time, that you have an advantage as the small player against the big player if you're armed with your own creativity, heroism, like they're willing to fight to the death, and technology. That technology isn't what you would need to be able to figure out where to put the weapons, how to organize people, where not to put them, and general things like that. I believe that I don't really believe in an arc of history. I think that's our job to bend history in a better direction. So I don't think the future is preordained. I do believe Ukraine can win. Of course, there's a definition of what win means, but I think but very importantly, people who are in similar situations across the world are thinking, wow, I might actually be able to defend myself in a way I didn't realize. But I better be very careful about the tools I acquire and how I organize my offense, defense capabilities. And there I do think also, it's like a lot of this also comes down to, and it's like things that are less interesting, like who is going to do the procurement of your technology. Institutions, medium and large, often suffer from, basically, I'm going to buy the technology of my buddy, whether that's advocacy, like I like this person, I don't like this person. This is a way to end up with a defeated country. You must have accurate evaluation of all aspects of the technology, including civil liberties and data protection, but also what does the product work? How well does it work? Can it be installed? How quickly can it be installed? What is the consequences? And this has to be done by people who are both aligned with you and technical. And that's one of the big lessons of Ukraine, that they have an ability to do this.
I mean, Ukraine has an enormous army of coders. Many big Western companies were essentially outsourcing their tech operations to Ukraine before the war. And something that, I'm told by Ukrainians involved in the fight is that in some ways they're actually leapfrogging some of the big stodgy Western institutions in terms of their creativity. They're taking products that people like you are supplying and then actually leapfrogging what the West might do. Do you think that's true? Or do you think they are fighting back because people like you are helping them?
Well, I think both are true. And by the way, for example, when we supply our product to NHS, the end use, so we supply an underlying, a product is very deep. And what we want from our partners is they take things that would take years to build, like data pipelining, like civil liberties, or in a security context, actually having granular understanding of who touches what and why, as an example, as purely in theory, would be very important in a country like Ukraine, because you have to make sure people who are in the inside, who do not have access to the data, but maybe nefarious, don't see it, and that they build things on top of that are truly unique and belong to them. That's the partnership we want. Software is a business where both sides actually can win. You get a lot there. It would take 10 years of focused talent if you knew what you were doing, and especially and had unlimited capital to produce some of the things we're supplying. But that doesn't mean you can't build things on top of it that make them 10 times better. And that's our business. And that's what I really like to hear.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, let's turn to the audience for questions. Do please wave your hands, and I'll try and get to as many of you as I possibly can. And I'm going to start with the gentleman in the front and then the woman behind him. It would be courteous but not compulsory to identify yourself, and please be as brief as possible.
Tim Hubbard from King's College and also Genomics England and Health Data Research UK. If you accept that you're right and you have to outsource stuff, and I'm not entirely sure I agree, because GDS, Government Digital Services, has been very successful, embedded in the civil service, changing all the government websites. But anyway, if you're right about high-tech stuff like this, there's a question. The central question is trust. The trust is, are you looking at the data? Now, you can get around that by implementing customer-managed encryption keys. Are you going to do that in Palantir? So you can offer your services and your infrastructure, but you couldn't look at the data. Only the NHS side could look at the data because they control the keys.
So
by the way, I'm not saying that you have to outsource all of it. I'm saying there are components where it just is not feasible to do it yourself. I would say there's a slight difference between website management and enterprise software, but the general and put this, there's the technical question you're asking. I'll reframe it, then I'll answer your question. If the question is, we can't see it, I have no earthly clue what the clandestine services in Britain are doing with our product. I don't see it. And to be able to see it, you need to have special clearance. So we have employees that can see it. They de facto Okay, yeah, but we don't need those employees. But de facto, by accepting the clearance, they go under British law. So it's like I can't. So I just want to go through it the way it actually happens. Then I can. Then if the key requirement was, I don't think you would actually want what you're asking. But if the key requirement, you might. If the key requirement is you don't want Palantirians to see the data, there is no reason for us to see the data if that's what you wanted. Now, I don't think that's what you're in the end going to want. I think what you're actually going to want is somebody goes under British law that is also a Palantirian. But we have clients where none of us are allowed to see the data. The part we do need to see is when something breaks. So you want to do a new feature set, something that we do not provide, or there's a new data pipeline, or someone writes code and breaks the code. We do need to see that. Right. And the way this happens in the wild actually is it's data segmentation. So you're asking a question as a former academic, I'd like to refine it just so I can give you the question I think that would be harder. In a real world situation, you're going to have vertical and horizontal integration. In every institution in the world, there are going to be things you want us to see because you want us to build a new feature set for you. We can't do that without seeing the interplay of your mind and the data and the ROI thing. That's one pocket. You're going to want to see us. And even if you say now you're not going to want to see it, you're going to end up there. There are going to be parts of a data set where we are never going to see it. And this is true of every clandestine and every commercial institution in the world. And the way this happens in the wild, what makes the product very powerful is we can empower environments where we see nothing. We can empower environments where we see a little bit. By the way, what makes it so powerful in a civilian and non-civilian context, we can also empower the same thing with your partner. So as an example, in the area you're involved in, we have a massive growth in the civilian context, so very large companies. The reason why we have it is if you have 5 companies and they need to share data, there's going to be part where they don't share the data, parts where they do, part where it's in between, parts where we see it and don't see it. You will need over time that architecture. I've been at this for 20 years. There's no institution in the world that does not have that architecture. And you can start off with, hey, we don't want you to see anything. We can empower that. But that's in some ways an approach that's going to last 6 months.
Right.
After 6 months, you're going to have both. And it may not even be Palantirians. In your work, there's certainly an expert in some other country where you can't send them all the data, but you want to see their insights. That has to be part of the architecture that you can do it. But the simple answer is yes.
Yes to what? Yes to the fact that Palantirians are seeing NHS data today, or yes to the fact that they can do?
Well, he asked a different question. He asked, will your architecture empower an environment where we don't see it? And,
all right. So yes.
And then the answer is yes.
Right.
But I'm saying, and that is a very important question. And I can tell you,
right.
We'll get to the next.
Okay, we have a question just behind.
Sure. Tangi Morgan, Bank of England. Going back to the original question that was asked, is big data a boon or a curse? I think I was probably one of the few people that put up it's a curse, but actually I think it's both. To your point, it depends on the scenarios. My issue is who determines the scenario. And it seems that your company is agnostic to where the product is sold. Is that correct or not?
Very important question. No, it is not. And by the way, we've been in this a long time. We almost went out of business. And you know why we almost went out of business? Because I kept telling investors, we won't sell in Russia, we won't sell in China, we won't sell in adversarial countries. By the way, so those are in my view, have become easy questions. I'll give you a harder scenario. There's a region in the world south of the United States. I don't want to go into the country. It's perfectly, according to them, they came to us with something that is perfectly acceptable and legal in their country, which was essentially profiling for credit ratings. Our lawyers pointed out that it was legal, culturally accepted in this country to do it, and our product is ideal for doing this. And this was, it's like, when I turned down a $10 million contract, it may sound like now we have made $1.7 billion in revenue in the last 12 months. Those were earth-shatteringly large sums of money. And I have investors that wanted to shoot me for that. And we turned down those contracts because we are not agnostic. By the way, there's a great article which you can read called the Palantir Pack, which like we are well known over the last 2 decades for getting the very best of the very best of the very best of the very best talent in the world and retaining and training them. And one of the main reasons we got that talent is when we got people I had people showing up in the beginning saying, "Oh, I love killing terrorists," and I'm like, "Well, we're interested sure, we do targeting, but I want to see that the people using the product have some mandate I believe in, and that we are also protecting data. And if you don't believe that, don't join Palantir." It's not the case that we sell our product. By the way, there are numerous allied countries that would pay us a lot of money that are not. Then there's complicated. We've had, and commercial contracts, and even and it's not the case that if I like for example in America, we've walked away from certain contracts where we were doing nothing illegal, and you could defend publicly what we did, and I didn't believe in it. We were the first company to say we would not build a Muslim database. The first company. We were the first company to explain that that we were not interested in supporting consumer internet. We were the first company to leave Silicon Valley because of that. We were the first company. I've told innumerable people in public and in private, people at Palantir know this. That's how I retain them. That there are lots of places we will not work, and this has cost us treasure and almost put us out of business. On the other hand, it is the reason we retained the talent. To your larger question, yeah, I think we are supplying very sharp instruments, and we have to be very careful who gets them and who implements them how. And that's an ongoing process for us that always has to be looked at over and over and over again.
Right. Any more questions? Right. Let's get some questions over on this side. The gentleman, yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Question is about targeting, right? Apple has been doing some slight changes recently in terms of how cookies provide tracking. So my question would be, what do you see would be the unexpected implications of this, diminished ability to track where people go, what people do, on the web?
Look, I'm not super involved in Silicon Valley tech companies, in my view, machinations. I don't. We partner with some of them. We're partnered with a number, essentially, of people that provide, compute. I don't believe there's any effect on surveillance by clandestine agencies based on what they're doing or not doing. And if you want that to be circumscribed, that is something that in many cases I'm in favor of. But that only happens as a result of judiciary and political agitation. And that I don't believe anyone in Silicon Valley actually is passionate about these issues. I'm not picking on any one company, but these are companies with very strong balance sheets and are very focused on their balance sheets.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go in a few minutes and we're almost out of time, but we have a very enthusiastic would-be questioner here who's been sitting patiently on the grass, waving his hand at me.
Hello, I'm Ian Sinclair from Metabolic Housing. The Chinese try and attempt, and probably do, enforce what they consider useful social behavior by photographing people and basically sending them fines. Apparently you can get fined for a traffic violation before you've got to the other side of the crosswalk. I'm interested to know if using your kind of data and algorithms and so on and so forth, it is possible to assess the social value and also the social disvalue of certain behaviors and link that to some sort of, for instance, we used to all be taught country dancing at school.
No, I understand the question.
Right. So the question is, okay, credit scoring, social control, etc. Is that something which? Yeah.
Well, I hate. Let me change the question so that can you develop a predicate before the behavior happens? In law enforcement, that would mean, could you stop crime before the person commits it? I understand the question, and I understand. am very skeptical of our products doing this. They could do it very well. And I'm skeptical of in allowing people to do this in a government context. Now, at banks will use our product to figure out which client is likely to stay, right? So retention, which is a big issue for banks. Like, that's how you make money. You keep the best clients. You identify who they are. No problem with that. Our product is very good at developing a predicate where there's no predicate. But I do not really want to be involved in doing this across the West, because I know it's benign, but it becomes a very slippery slope very quickly, and becomes non-benign, where you can basically and negatively evaluate the actual underlying value of individuals, and then do it neighborhood by neighborhood and expand it. So I'm not out there protesting people doing this. I just am not enthusiastic about Palantir doing this, partly because I think we would do it. We're the ideal product for it.
Right. Okay. We have one very quick question there, and then we must wrap in a couple of minutes. So you have 20 seconds to ask your question.
Hi, Nick Gaynor. So, Alex, what happens when you're no longer running the company? How can you be sure that these controls will outlast you?
Well, the controls are built into the architecture of the software and are not removable. So what I cannot control is a lot of these comes down to say you're at a big institution that's powerful and you want to abuse our product. Can you do it? How long can you do it for? Can you get rid of your footprints? And the answer is, like, first of all, this will be role controlled. So you'd be constrained in how you could operate. Your footprints cannot be removed. And de facto, you can run algorithms on top of that for nefarious behavior. So I'm making it very, very difficult. So if and when I get hit by a car, it'll still be very difficult. It is, in fact, the case, though, that when you're looking at why does no one trust Silicon Valley? There are lots of reasons. First of all, it makes all the money. It's not like non-Silicon Valley makes a lot of money. So that's one reason. Two, if you have a conversation with people, you really feel like, oh, they think I'm an idiot. They're going to make all the money. They obviously don't care. And they're telling me whatever basically horseshit some political operative sometimes from this country has told them to say. And so it is important to ask, what has this person done over a long period of time? It's like, these companies now are 10, 15 years old. What is their history? I mean, obviously they've made mistakes. Do you believe it? And I would like to believe, when I get put to pasture, that we find somebody that is also passionate about these issues. I would say there's one thing that is very important to understand. We are a company that requires the best talent in the world. The best talent in the world has no interest in being Count Dracula.
Right.
They don't, and they can work anywhere. They have not signing up to be, sure, they want benefits and an environment. They don't want to be bad. They want to believe in their work. Right. I'm not saying everyone, but at scale.
Right.
And that's why it's crucially important for our business.
Well, thank you. Well, I think, frankly, we could go on for another hour, given how many hands have been waving at me and how many people are still packed here. But we don't have an hour. So it just remains to me to say thank you for braving the protesters to come here. And thank you for answering my questions.
And I'm sure even tougher than the protesters.
Thank you.